Today we're going to be looking at Ricoh GRD IV. This is from 2010. It is a 10 megapixel CCD based camera, and I'm really impressed with the look and feel of this camera. In this video, I decided to run two key tests. Test number one was using my test image, which you can see right now. How would this camera reproduce at ISO 80, 200, 400, 1600. I never shoot materials really faster than that, so that covers every range that I need to be concerned about, especially because this camera has an f1.9 lens. I mean, I don't really need that kind of speed. I also was curious how the camera would look at longer exposures. So by putting my variable neutral density filter, which I have on the front of the camera here, I was able to dial in f2.8 at 6 seconds for every single one of those ISOs. So it's 6 seconds at ISO 80, 6 seconds at ISO 200, 400, 1600. And I also then took the highest ISO found. I think this is going to blow you away. And I said, what happens if I apply 2025 noise reduction software to it? And then what happens if I apply 2025 film emulation for a high-speed film to it? It's really quite beautiful. So let me stop talking and let's go take a look at the test files in the studio. All right, let's start off by looking at the base ISO of 80, and as you can see, it's beautiful. This was a 6-second long exposure. Once again, I used my variable ND to keep all the exposures to 6 seconds. So not only are we looking at the ISO, but we're also looking at how the camera handles that 6-second exposure as a raw file, and I think it's great. I've tested out to 30 seconds, out to a minute, and I was really impressed with the raw file and how well they worked. But look at the color, look at the detail. I mean, it's so beautiful, so crisp, so clear. I love everything about it. Now, if we jump up to ISO 200, I'm skipping the 100 just because it was so similar. And the 200, the biggest difference that I see is I'm starting to see a little more of that texture in the wall. But guess what? It doesn't feel bad. It feels, quote unquote, film-like to me. 200 speed film, if you enlarge it in 35 millimeter, has a texture to it. It's not that digital smooth. And I think this is one thing we have to keep in mind. Higher ISO materials have more grain, historically speaking, and that's part of the look and the romance of it. So now let's jump up to ISO 400. The 400 looks great, and yes, guess what? I'm seeing a little more texture in it. It's reminiscent of what I would see in a 400 speed color material. Tri-X at 400 is not totally smooth. The new Tri-X is damn close, but the old Tri-X, historically speaking, has a grain and a texture, and that's part of the look and the feeling of a 400 speed film. It's not just about being able to shoot, in lower light. It's also about how that higher speed film in the old days looked. How the grain had this emotional energy and presence to it. And I see that in these CCD cameras. The CMOS camera at ISO 400, you'd see no grain whatsoever. It'd be perfectly smooth. On the modern cameras like an M11 or something, I mean, you're not going to see any kind of grain or texture until you're well over 3200, 6400, and even higher, because it's so good at keeping that noise pulled down. But I, for one, don't like that. To me, that sort of goes against sort of my visual quality that I'm looking for. So I decided then to jump the 800 and go straight to 16. I never in film days shot anything from any of my works really over ISO 1600. Most of my work was shot really and is shot around, ISO 180. And if I'm doing a long exposure where I want it to be sharp, most of my work is blurry, but if I wanted it to be sharp, I would use this new invention called a tripod, and that would give me the ability of having it be razor sharp. All of these were done on a tripod, and as you can see, for 1600 speed, this looks really good. The grain is actually really beautiful. Yes, we are losing details within the images. The faces of the people from my family are not as clear. The reproduction in the painting isn't as beautiful as it was down at ISO 80, 100, or 200, but it's still appropriate for what a 600 speed material would look like. Now, if we go even a little further, and I said, okay, why don't I take 1600 and I'll do a little bit of grain reduction? And this was nothing fancy. This was just using NIC's grain reduction. I went in, I dialed it down just a little bit, not too much. I didn't do it at 100%. I think I did it like at 40%. I think that's wicked respectable for a 1600 speed from a camera from 2011 using a CCD. I think it's actually really pretty. I would much rather have this look than something that's really slick and smooth. That's just not my aesthetic. And then I said, you know what? Let me take that 1600 speed grain reduced file And I'm going to add a little bit of film grain to it and see how that looks. And I think this looks really good. I think you'd be hard pressed to say that this doesn't feel like 1600 speed color film. I mean, yeah, it might even look a little finer and cleaner than 1600 speed color film does enlarged. And once again, all of these files are enlarged out to 20 by 27 inches. So they're a really big image. And I, for one, am really impressed with how the overall ISO range, I would never shoot anything over 1600. It's an f1.9 lens. Why would I need to? So I mean, most of the work that I shoot will be at base ISO of 80, 100, or 200. I maybe could see myself doing some night work at 400, but once again, with a 1.9 lens, that's really not going to be necessary. So stay tuned right now for my final thoughts on this topic. In conclusion, I really like this camera. The Ricoh GRD IV from 2011. It's a CCD 10 megapixel camera. And what I like about it is that it brings to my photography a lot of what I like in my film photography. I like texture in my images. I like a little bite. Modern CMOS cameras, especially when you start getting up in the 60 megapixel plus range, are just too smooth. They're just too perfect for what I want to see in my work. Is because I'm a classic analog photography guy, I know what Tri-X on an 8x10 inch silver piece of paper looks like. I know that, if I'm shooting at 3200 speed, there should be some grain in the image. The image should have some pop. It's going to have an energy to it that, a really smooth digital CMOS file that's flawless, up to 20,000 isn't going to have. A camera like this in that lower resolution CCD sensor, I think you saw it, I know I saw it in the sample images. It has more of a film-like quality in 35 millimeter than I would say the newer cameras do. If you take a 60 megapixel file and try to emulate it to look like 400 speed Tri-X, it's not going to look like 400 speed Tri-X. There's just too much information in that file for 35 millimeter. 60 megapixels is looking more like 6 by 9 centimeter negatives and even getting close to 4 by 5. It's a different feeling. So I, for one, am going to embrace the coolness of the GRD4 CCD camera. Also was really impressed with the low light, long exposure capability of this camera. 6 seconds looked fantastic. I've done shots out to 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and they all look really good. The longer exposures have a slightly longer processing time in the camera. Once again, this is 2011 technology, but nothing that's a problem. What I would encourage all of you to think about doing is think about, do you really need ISO 6400? Do you really need ISO 3200? This is a 1.9 lens. It has every single thing that I need at 1.9. I can shoot ISO 80, 100, and 200 at 1.9 and be walking around doing street photography. And because it's a smaller sensor for those street shooters out there, you're going to get more depth of field at f2, f2.8 than you would in a full frame sensor. A lot of advantages to a smaller sensor in CCD format. Thank you very much for listening. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Now go shoot some film and maybe a few digital photos.